Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Goy in Singapore. The headlines. Facebook's problems get worse. Politicians in Europe and the US demand answers about alleged misuse of personal data. Another explosion in the Texan city of Austin, the 6th in a month.
And I'm Sharon Lail in London, also on the programme. A BBC investigation finds Rohingya girls who fled violence in Myanmar now trafficked into prostitution in Bangladesh. And a victim of Asia's demand, the white rhino takes another step towards extinction.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore, 1 a.m. in London and 6 p.m. in California, where executives at Facebook are under growing pressure to explain how their company gathers and uses our information online. Allegations that millions of users had personal information harvested for political gain have triggered investigations by the authorities in the US, the UK and Europe. Cambridge Analytica, a company hired by the Trump campaign in 2016, told undercover reporters from Britain's Channel 4 News how some of the information was used.
Have you met Mr. Trump?
Many times.
You have?
We did all the research, all the data, all the analytics, all the targeting. We ran all the digital campaign, the television campaign, and our data informed all the strategy.
Well, the man speaking there was Chief Executive of Cambridge Analytica, Alexander Nix. He's since been suspended by the company. And a little earlier, Facebook has also released a statement. It said its Chief Executive, Mark Zuckerberg, and Chief Operating Officer, Sheryl Sandberg, and their teams are working around the clock to get all the facts and take the appropriate action moving forward because they understand the seriousness of this issue. The entire company, it says, is outraged. We were deceived. We're committed to vigorously enforcing our policies to protect people's information and will take whatever steps are required to see that this happens. Well, our media editor Amal Rajan says this is the biggest crisis Facebook has had since it was founded 14 years ago.
The number of issues they now have are they're disparate, they're wide, and they cover many fronts. Tens of billions of dollars have been wiped off Facebook's share and stock market valuation. There's regulators on both sides of the Atlantic that want to get their claws into the company. There's a senior executive who said that he's eventually going to leave the company a few months from now. And there's a mood here and a feeling of real angst because there's a real feeling that this is an issue that the company has not got a grip of. And it's got to be said that Facebook's response to the issue has made things worse, not better. You mentioned that statement with senior executives Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg working around the clock. There was a meeting of senior staff here earlier today, and those two executives were not present. When this story first broke, Facebook were pretty robust in their response and said this wasn't a data breach, really arguing about what some people would call a technicality. The truth is, it was potentially something much, much worse, which is the mass harvesting of the personal data of tens of millions of people who didn't know their data was being used in that way. So it's those millions of people, the ordinary members of the public, who are now thinking again about their relationship with Facebook, and that's where the reputational damage really kicks in.
You said they didn't get the response right, so what can they do to restore reputation among investors and, of course, its users?
Well, investors are now very uppity. There's talk of an investor rebellion. The first thing that Facebook have got to do is get all of the information about what they knew and when. It's still unclear. The accounts given about who knew what and when vary between the whistleblower that used to work for Cambridge Analytica, a chap called Chris Wiley, a Canadian man, and what Facebook themselves and Cambridge Analytica have said. So all of the information about who knew what and when needs to be made clear. We also need to know the extent to which the data breach, or if it wasn't a breach, the data leak, the fact that 50 million people were reportedly had their information out there. We need to know exactly when that happened and what Facebook did about it. And the other issue is that I think that Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg need to come out in public and say something about this issue. It's very striking, the echoes with when there was first talk about Russians using Facebook to spread fake news and disinformation. Mark Zuckerberg said the idea that it had influenced the 2016 election of President Trump was a pretty crazy idea. He recanted a few months later, and on this one too, it looks like he's staying silent, where Facebook staff are certainly very clear in their messaging here. They need leadership and they want to hear from him.
And briefly, before we let you go, what can Facebook users do in order to protect themselves?
Well, I think there's two issues here. One is Facebook users are themselves, they need to make sure you're fully aware of the fact that when they go online, they leave these vast digital footprints. I'm afraid that's rather boring, but you do need to look at your terms and conditions, you do need to look at the privacy settings that you have, you do need to make sure you fully understand the absolute depth and breadth and extent of the information that Facebook has. So the first thing is consumers need to wise up. And then the second thing is they need to be pragmatic and realistic, I think, about the fact that when there is such vast amounts, unimaginable really, troves of data online held by a few superstar firms and companies, some of that data is going to get lost, some of it is going to fall into the hands of individuals, states and companies that might do things that those consumers don't really want. So wise up about your rights and what you're leaving behind online, and also be realistic about the fact that sometimes that data is going to go missing or fall into the wrong hands.
Well, let's turn to the United States now, and there's breaking news from Austin in Texas, where there's been another explosion, according to police hunting a suspected serial bomber. Now, this is the scene there where essentially we're seeing emergency officials responding to this reported blast, we believe, in the southern part of the state capital city. Local media reporting that the explosion took place in a thrift store, and of course all of this comes just hours after police linked all the explosive devices found in the city. Now, a 30-year-old man's believed to have been injured in this one, but is expected to live, according to emergency services, and we'll bring you more as soon as we can speak to our correspondent there. And also making news today, President Trump has lost a bid to dismiss a defamation lawsuit brought by an ex-Playboy model and apprentice contestant, Summer Zerwas. She says Mr. Trump groped her after she appeared on his former reality TV show. Rejecting Mr. Trump's claim that he was immune from being sued, a New York judge said he had absolutely no authority to dismiss litigation just because he occupied the White House. 23 Russian diplomats and their families have left the UK today. They've been expelled after the Salisbury poison attack. The British Prime Minister has said Russia orchestrated the poisoning of the double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Russia denies any involvement. Now let's take a look at these pictures now, because this is a water main break in University City in San Diego. Now this has created a geyser of water that shot up stories above a California highway. The break shut down the road naturally for about roughly 30 minutes while crews worked to shut off the water. And according to local media, construction crews hit a blow-off valve, causing that break.
Well, China's annual parliamentary session has closed, with President Xi Jinping now cleared to rule indefinitely, outlining a nationalist vision of his country as a rising global power. He spoke of the China solution to world problems and delivered a stern warning over his resolve to protect every inch of Chinese territory. Our China correspondent John Sudworth, who has been covering the parliament since it opened 2 weeks ago, assesses its implications.
While the world's been watching China's parliament, Chinese people have been in cinemas watching this. Amazing China, the country's highest earning documentary ever, and an eye-popping propaganda fest. How was the film, I asked. Fantastic. It spoke from the heart, he tells me. But then...
Did you have to come?
Let's just say it was organized, this woman says, revealing that her state-backed company block-booked the cinema. That the government is corralling people into nationalist movies now is no coincidence. This two-week parliamentary session has been all about China's sense of its national historic destiny and the apparent belief that only one man can guide it. Sworn in for a second term, but in theory able to rule for life.
And I'm really concerned about
Wang Xiangwei, a former editor of the South China Morning Post, of those prepared to accept that President Xi needs to be given a little longer.
I think there is a strong, compelling argument here that because of what he has done over the past 5 years, that's why he has received so much support within the leadership and outside the party for him to get a stronger mandate. Of course, there are concerns, but I think the Chinese government has done a pretty good job of ensuring that they are not showing in public.
That's an understatement. The Parliament has been marked by barely a murmur of dissent and heavy censorship of almost all public discussion. As the delegates head home, they will have been infused by Xi Jinping's vision of a nation reclaiming its place on the global stage. But what's happened here will have consequences not just for 1.3 billion Chinese people, but for all of us. A rising superpower has placed its fate totally, indefinitely in that man's hands. The fortunes of the Chinese nation and its ruler are once again intimately entwined. John Sudworth, BBC News, Beijing.
You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme, a special BBC investigation has found Rohingya girls forced to flee Myanmar being trafficked into prostitution.
And also coming up, Arise Sir Ringo. The former Beatles drummer rocks up at Buckingham Palace to receive a knighthood.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Marie Coy in Singapore.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Sharon Jitlale in London. Our top stories. Politicians in Europe and the US are calling executives at Facebook to answer questions about allegations that data was misused to influence elections.
And another explosion has been reported in the city of Austin in the American state of Texas. It's the 6th in the month. Now let's take a look at some front pages from around the world, and we start with the South China Morning Post, which is leading on a warning from the country's president. It says Xi Jinping has vowed to crush any attempt to divide what he describes as the motherland. It's after the US signed the Taiwan Travel Act into law, basically allowing American officials to visit the island. Meanwhile, the Gulf News is covering a Saudi diplomatic visit to the US. The report details a meeting between Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and US President Donald Trump with a focus on trade and investment opportunities. And finally, the Straits Times here in Singapore is looking at problems with a cycle sharing scheme. Operators are now being made to apply for licenses after thousands of bikes were left indiscriminately parked around the city. We have seen quite a few of them, haven't we, Sharon Jid? So those are the papers. What stories are sparking discussions online?
Well, apparently, Marika, the French may be known for their culinary pride, but tastes there are changing, because for the first time in history, French people have bought more American-style hamburgers than their own classic jambon beurre sandwich. A new study says 1.46 billion burgers were sold last year, compared with 1.22 billion of the traditional baguettes filled with sliced ham. The news certainly has people talking.
Now, a BBC investigation has revealed that Rohingya girls as young as 13 who fled Myanmar in the past 6 months are being trafficked into prostitution in Bangladesh. The undercover team filmed traffickers openly offering the girls for sex in Cox's Bazar, the town's nearest to the refugee camps, where hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims now live. The BBC's Michelle Hussain has the story.
A small city on the Bay of Bengal, where the main business was tourism, is now the hub for aid agencies working in the nearby refugee camps. But alongside the shop fronts, the beachside bars and the hotels of Cox's Bazar, there's an open secret. After hearing repeated stories about children trafficked into prostitution, we went in search of the evidence. One 14-year-old Rohingya girl we met in the camps and whose identity we've protected told me what happened to her as she crossed from Myanmar into Bangladesh.
Women came with a van. They asked me if I'd go with them. Not long after that, in a building in Cox's Bazar, they brought 2 boys to me. They showed me a knife and punched me in my tummy and beat me because I wasn't cooperating. Then the boys raped me. I wasn't willing to have sex, but they kept going.
We heard other accounts from girls of a similar age. A 13-year-old told me she was lured out of the camp by a woman from within the Rohingya community, offering her work. With the desperate conditions the refugees are living in, her family agreed to let her go.
She came to my home. We know her. She said, "You are not being fed properly. Come with me to Cox's Bazar. I will give you a job." When we got there, she put me in a hotel in the morning. By the afternoon, a boy was put in my room. He beat me and raped me. I asked the woman why I should do this. She told me, "If you don't do this, I will kill you."
After only 48 hours on the ground, our team had identified a number of people offering children for sex. This was one of them, not only boasting about his own collection of women and children, but of a network of traffickers, all of whom had more than 10 girls under their control. We had to be careful not to create a demand and asked for girls who were immediately available. We were offered these 3 and told they were all Rohingyas aged between 13 and 17. We went to the police and told them what we had found. They agreed to conduct an operation that same evening. Our undercover investigator posed as a client who wanted to have sex with children and arranged with the trafficker for the delivery of 2 young girls to a hotel.
To bring your girls down here.
But as we waited, the trafficker sent a scout.
8 o'clock, red hoodie.
He asked our investigator to go with him,
What's that?
but we needed the trafficker to come to us.
All right, he's on his way with the girls.
He appeared to change his mind.
Here we go. Here we go. We're here.
But when the girls arrived, it was a driver who was with them and who collected the money.
How's it going? Siddiqui. 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 2 for you. Ask them, can they, if tonight's good, can they get more?
We handed over around £140.
Okay.
As soon as the deal was done, the police moved in.
Come on, girls. Hey, come here.
The girls were 2 of those we'd seen in the photograph.
Here, come on. Hey.
As they were taken aside and into safety, they told us they were 15 and 21 and that their families depended on the money they made from sex work. What the 2 girls told me here tonight reveals so much about how they and others like them get trapped in the sex industry in Cox's Bazar. They've never been to school and have no idea how they would support themselves without this work. And with the arrival of so many refugees in the nearby camp, there are even more vulnerable young people for the traffickers to prey upon. Childcare professionals and trafficking experts helped us to arrange care for the girls afterwards. The younger one went into the care of social services, but the 21-year-old refused. We handed over all the information we had to the police. But the trafficker is still at large, part of an established network that puts children into sex work here, and as our investigation found, also sends them further afield to India and Nepal. Now the presence of a large refugee population, including many unaccompanied children, is providing easy pickings for the traffickers and another danger for the Rohingya people. Mishal Hussain, BBC News, Bangladesh.
Now, the northern white rhino is a species on the brink of extinction following the death of a 45-year-old male in Kenya, the last of his kind in the world. His name was Sudan, and he was put down on Monday after his health problems worsened significantly. His daughter and granddaughter are the only female northern white rhinos left, as our correspondent Alistair Leathead reports from Kenya.
And then there were two. The last remaining northern white rhinos on Earth, now that the last male, Sudan, has died of old age. A subspecies of rhino ever closer to extinction. One is Najin, 27 years old, Sudan's daughter. The other is Fatu, his teenage granddaughter, the last of what was once a great species that roamed Central Africa. This was Sudan. And for the last few years, scientists and conservationists have been trying to get him to mate. They even put the 45-year-old on Tinder as part of a publicity campaign. There was no other animal quite like him.
It highlights first and foremost, the fact that human greed and sometimes, human activities that are not controlled can drive species to extinction.
The last wild northern white rhinos were seen here in Garamba National Park in the northern Republic of Congo. But that was many years ago. They became extinct in the wild in 2008.
Well, Fatu and Najin are now the last two remaining northern white rhinos, and obviously they're both females. They're here under armed guard 24 hours a day. Such is the continuing threat to these animals from poachers. They're now incredibly rare. There are only 30,000 rhinos left on the planet. And Sudan was unusual for his kind, in that he died of old age.
Now it's up to the scientists and a never-before-tried fertility treatment in a last-gasp effort to save these animals from extinction. Alistair Leathead, BBC News, in northern Kenya.
Now, the Beatles legend Ringo Starr has been knighted at Buckingham Palace for his services to music. Speaking after the ceremony, Starr told Colin Patterson he was delighted to receive the new honour.
It means a lot, actually. It means recognition for things we've done musically and in life. So I was really pleased to accept this award.
Where does it rank compared to your other career achievements? What would you put up there with it?
First, number one? It's way up there. It is, it's way up there. I'm not holding this anymore, okay? I'm going to just close the box.
Obviously, this is not the first time you've been to Buckingham Palace for an honour. 1965, the Beatles came for the MBEs. Compare and contrast today with that.
Well, that was a long time ago, and it was 4 lads, straight out of Liverpool, really, then. And we've all seen a bit of the world since then, and this was another honour. So we had a lot of fun because there was 4 of us, and I was a bit shaky today on my own.
Well, apparently that 1965 you were so nervous you all snuck off to a toilet in Buckingham Palace, had a cigarette.
Who said that? I don't know. I'm not keeping that rumour going.
You also wore your MBE on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's famously. What are your plans for the
Well, with this I'll be wearing it at breakfast.
You've been watching Newsday on the BBC, but don't go away because I'll be back with business news. And could this be the answer to better productivity? We look at how brainwave technology is being used to improve the way we work.
It's from Austin, Texas, where police are responding to a reported explosion in the city. Now, of course, this is the sixth explosion, we believe, following a series of sometimes deadly blasts. We're getting more reports through from the Reuters news agency, where apparently officials are saying that this latest blast does not appear to be related to the other incidents. But of course, we know it comes after a series of parcel bombs in Texas that have killed 2 people. It's put lots of residents on edge there, and of course this is escalating now. We saw 2 more incidents, a bomb that exploded at a FedEx distribution center near San Antonio as well, and some 500 federal agents are on this case investigating it. We'll bring you more on that in coming hours.